Well, hello, everyone. I join you on this beautiful March morning, and we are going to finish up our discussion on Chapter 7, interest groups. And so we're primarily going to focus here on who joins interest groups. All right, so as we look over here on with Chapter 7, let's consider some of the questions there. Who joins and why they might join, and then just as important, who does not join. So when we think of interest groups, one of the ways of looking at that in terms of who joins is that there's clearly a membership bias. You can see that described on page 236. They may not necessarily, the authors of your text, use that phrase, but clearly that's suggested. And so there are some people that are more likely to join than others. So individuals with higher incomes and education join traditional interest groups with greater frequency than other individuals. So there's going to be a pool of people that are more likely to join, and just as importantly, a pool of people who are less likely to join. Now, traditional groups are the brick and mortar groups that are described on page 236. So the ones they have formal addresses and formal plant missions, and they have a tradition with them. So that's just a group that's the type of interest group that's going to connect more with those with more education and more income. The working class in the United States, they're less likely to join, and unfortunately for their voice, what has been reduced in the last 50 years or so, a fairly consistent decline, has been that labor unions are less an alternative. There's still a power in many ways, but not as they once were. And there's just not as many people that get up in the morning and punch a clock and work in a factory and drive a truck, those kinds of jobs that are also members of a union. And so we do see less of a voice from that group of collective group of occupations. So when we look at the incentives to join, here we can see some solidary incentives. There are several incentives that are listed on pages 237 to 238. So there's companionship in joining. We see overall the health benefits for most people in joining groups. And so you can see that interest groups can provide that as well. So while the Sierra Club is a well-known club in trying to assist people in lobbying, as that term is described in this chapter, and trying to be politically active in helping in environmental causes, for their members, also there are opportunities for companionship to go out on, have meetings, go on hikes, and get to participate in different environmental causes. And so there we can see the benefit of joining a group. We also have groups that are concerned, again, with the cause. That's their primary reason why they're going to be involved. Now, those environmental groups would certainly fit in that category, are groups that deal with women's rights, such as abortion or stopping abortion. And so that can be an incentive as well to join because you want to be part of a group that has a particular cause that they're trying to accomplish. So a propulsive incentive. We also see material incentives. They can't get around that. You know, it's just the reality that people are joining because they get material benefits from joining. So that's going to be part of the reason why people may be involved. And so do you get higher wages, better protection for your job? The symbol that we have here is the Teamsters, and the Teamsters certainly have been a group that have helped truck drivers. And so I think it's pretty safe to say that consistently you will see those who belong to labor unions do get more income. And there are other groups, of course, that are providing material benefits. Professional associations can be involved for people who are doctors, dentists, those kinds of areas as well. So clearly, there is an element here of the material benefit. So that's an interesting question. Just kind of think that one over, right? Do you have anyone in your group, in your family, that belongs to a union? My guess is that there are fewer people than we used to have in this class or in our society overall that would belong to a union. We do see that declining, and I think there's in many ways unfortunate situations because of it, in terms of just balancing out voices. Again, thinking about our last recording, looking at checks and balances, labor does not have as much of a balance now to capital. And when we look at economic situations because of a decline of labor unions. But my guess is some of you have family members that are still belong to a union. My granddad belonged to the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, for example, and they have a big union hall on South Main in Joplin. So we still see a presence of unions in this area and across America. Well, another section of your text deals with types of interest groups. Pages 242, 243 start to look at these different types of interest groups. And so you get a sense of why some people would join an interest group. So here you're looking at three main categories under the economic interest groups. So corporate and business interest, which again would be labor, but you could also see other kinds of business associations. The National Association of Manufacturers, for example, one of the better known corporate or business interest. Chamber of Commerce. Then you have agricultural interest, one of them right there, very particular, as your text mentions. As you come up with new products, new foodstuffs, you're going to have different types of agricultural groups. Certainly pecan's been around for a while. As we can see here, this association in Oklahoma has been around since 1927. But we can see that there would be benefits then of joining an association like that for that particular product in agriculture. And then trade, professional interests mentioned before, you could have different, such as a machinist union, but also again, professional interests such as doctors and dentists, lawyers would have different associations. So you have economic groups, you have again, interest groups that are focusing on purposive interest, public and ideological groups. Consumer interest, one of the best known individuals that's led consumer interest for close to 60 years now is an individual named Ralph Nader. And he's can be identified as an interest group entrepreneur. So he really promoted interest groups and has done a fabulous job of doing that. And so think about that term there, interest group entrepreneur, someone who promotes an interest group. Environmental interest groups would be in that area, religious interest groups as well. And there's some good descriptions there in your text of how those groups are involved in trying to change the United States, and they're focusing on a particular cause. But one of the big issues that is certainly those ideological groups may be faced with, environmental groups, religious groups, would be collective goods. If you come up with a policy that is going to be, it's not going to be just beneficial to the people in that group. It's going to be as far as you can, you're focusing on a cause. So the cause is to help everyone. So if it's to help everyone, if it truly does help everyone, then that's what we refer to as a collective good, or at least you can find some argument that it does benefit everyone. But then the question is, well, then why would anyone need to join? Because if you're already going to get the benefit, whether you join or not, you, like anyone else, you have other things to do. And you have other ways to spend your money. So this becomes a free rider problem described here on pages 243, 244. where individuals get the benefit and they didn't do anything, right? So that certainly becomes a concern for interest groups. How do you overcome that issue? And so this is referred to as the rational choice theory. I mean, the whole issue here is that it makes perfect sense for people not to join groups. Why would they need to join if you're going to get the benefit without joining? So there has to be other incentives, and perhaps there can be other incentives, ways of making a distinction between those who are members versus those who are not. Now, there may be some ways of coming up with other benefits that people will somehow derive from that. They'll just start to feel better about themselves for being involved. And that certainly does work in intrinsic rewards, but that may not necessarily work for everyone. And so there does need to be some type of description made to determine why some people will join over others and the benefit that will come their way. This is an ongoing issue that interest groups have to face: the free rider problem and the rational choice theory. So then your text turns to the power of the iron triangle. And one way of looking at the iron triangle is to look at the ongoing expenditures for a fighter jet in the United States called the F-35 fighter. This is the fighter to end all fighters, as far as the people who created would believe. And it's going to be something that is universal in our military. So in other words, instead of having several different fighter jets for the different parts of the military that have fixed air wings, such as the Navy, the Air Force, and the Marine Corps, now just say, well, there's one fighter jet. And in some ways that's efficient. Of course, that becomes a problem if there's something wrong with that one fighter jet. So that becomes also an issue to take into consideration. But also with the F-35 has been just the tremendous over budgeting that's occurred. I mean, the expenditures here are in the billions, if not teetering close to trillion, for the amount of money spent on the F-35. So even if this is the greatest jet ever, has there been cases in which you can look at the iron triangle and its relationship that's caused an ongoing expenditure and overspending that isn't justifiable? And we do see, of course, part of the dilemma here is that once the spending has occurred, can you ever stop? So if you've gone $100 billion overspent, over budget, let's say, I mean, it's astronomical. Maybe it's not that high, but it's extremely high when you think about the overall costs. And I would urge you just to go online and read about it. But once that over budgeting has started, for something like the F-35, how do you stop it? Because if you stop spending on the F-35, now you've spent all this money and you don't have a jet. So you keep spending and you finally get the jet, but now you've spent way too much money than what was expected in that case. And so that becomes part of the question about this fighter jet that we have. But it does fit into the iron triangle. And the iron triangle, as you can see here, and it's brought out in your text, to certainly go back to the pages that have a description here. You have an excellent description in your text. There are three main parts of the iron triangle: legislative committees, interest groups, and bureaucratic agencies. And so we'll come back to the iron triangle when we cover Congress and when we cover bureaucracy, and we need to. It's a key component in understanding the United States government: how we spend money, how much money we spend, who has the money, what areas of our society have more political power than others. You can almost always trace it back to some form of the iron triangle. So I would urge you to really focus on this area in the text. And it then comes back to a situation that we can see here that President Eisenhower observed in 1960 as he was leaving the White House. This is, of course, an individual who had been a five-star general in the military. And so he also observed that we have something that we got to be very concerned about: the ongoing use of money in the military. So we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. So think about that phrase, military-industrial complex. You probably have come across that somewhere along the way. So you will hear now people saying that we are not spending enough money on defense. And that might be legitimate, but they probably also don't share with you how much we are spending every year on defense. And it's $700 billion. So 700 billion is not enough. And so it gives you some idea then of the amount of money that may be involved in this area of our government. All right, so that's the last of our recordings on interest groups. Our next recording will focus on Chapter 8 and political parties.